the mainstream fitness business model was not made and was not built to help people get to their goals. You know, there are some substantial roots in predatory capitalism and taking advantage of people's ignorance. Whether you are a male or a female, we are all victims of the same system.
You find yourself back at square one over and over and over again. And so eventually there's this realization of like, oh, I need to do things differently, but nobody has ever shown me how. But I would say the collateral for me was more of my mental health that came along with that, just really poor body image. And it took several years to work through that.
And I was going through a season of my life where I was realizing, oh, it's okay to not be okay.
And so like Patrick said, just like leaning into the transparency piece, and like people like to know that their coaches are real people that struggle with the same things that they struggle with.
Welcome back, everybody, to Flipping the Lid. You know what we do here by now, but every once in a while we get the privilege of having a co-host, my beautiful bride, Ashley. And she always brings a different perspective, and it's always a great way for us to be able to communicate with couples who are doing epic shit together. And guess what? This is one of those couples. I have come to adore and love Patrick and Meagan for who they are as individuals, who they are as a couple, but also what they're doing to basically say fuck you to the normative fitness industry and show what it really looks like to actually create sanity metrics, not just vanity metrics, how to actually have a healthy relationship with yourself, your body, your movement, and to be able to intuitively allow yourself to guide. But there's so many other layers that are required for you to access within yourself to make that successful and sustainable. And these two get it. And that's why they've partnered up together in life, in business, and why they're here with us today. So Patrick, Meagan, dude, I love you guys. I'm so happy you're here.
Well, we love you too. Thank you for having us.
Yeah, super excited to be here.
You know what I just realized?
What?
They're actually my first experience working with any coaches.
Oh, you?
Yeah, I've never worked with
They're the first coaches
before.
you've hired?
Yeah.
What?
So that says a lot. Not that my opinion is that widely, requested from people, but it means a lot.
It's valid, and thank you for that. It's an honor to be supporting you in that way. But I think it speaks very heavily to the thought process that goes into hiring help, right? Because it's not just about the coaching, it's about the coaches and it's about the relationship. And if you don't feel good about the people you're navigating behavior change with, there's no point in even starting. So happy to have you with us.
Same.
Well, and here I am having spent almost $750,000 on myself on coaching in the last 12 years. And my wife telling me that she's never hired a single coach. Now, I'm actually going to say there's a little bit of bullshit to the statement.
Okay. I guess I had
but they're the first real coaches, right?
Yes.
Like that are actually coaching, not just like teaching some bullshit surface level concepts.
No, I've never had like any type of
that you like worked
coaching
with,
program.
Right?
Yeah.
That's what I mean. Yeah.
I mean, I've had fitness.
Yeah, but it's all been like digital. Like you haven't worked with anybody hands-on. Yeah. It's totally different. So anyway, what I want to say is thank you for you two and your role in helping her realize the value that she has and the fact that she's worthy of investing in. And I have to say, as her partner, to witness her jump into this with you guys, and the support that I gave all along, I knew it had to be her decision, but I was all in if it was going to happen. And it's because of who you guys are. So that's going to lead me to really the only question that I ask the same to everybody. And I'm going to put you guys on the spot to have you answer it together. Okay. It's who are you in your words? Because we love you and you're incredible, but who are you and how do you describe who you are to the world?
It's a very, very good question. What comes to mind for me is I am a very eclectic, movement-driven individual continuing to try to find an answer and purpose to life.
I like that. Meagan, I want to hear the same answer from you, and then I want to hear how you guys answer who you are together.
Yeah. I would say that I am a very caring, empathetic, and grounding presence that I like to help people, not just in business, but that's just kind of how I operate. I always like to have everyone around me be their best. And so I like to do that by showing empathy and compassion. And I'm not as eclectic as Patrick, but
I don't think many people are. Let's just be honest. Can we just call that what it is? Like, not as many people are as eccentric as him, and that's okay.
Yeah. We are two halves of a whole. So, we complement each other in those ways. So.
You definitely have some parfait vibes, though.
I do.
You've got the layers.
I'm not as outward about it. I'm not as outward about it. I am
She's closeted.
Yeah.
Wait, so is parfait about layers? Like, is that like a layered cake and onion reference?
Actually,
parfait.
Okay.
Yeah. The donkey.
Well, I feel like
I
didn't.
Anyway, look it up.
Shrek is like an onion, though.
Google it.
Shrek's like an onion. She's not like an onion. It's okay. All right. So who are you guys together?
Meagan, are you wanting to give it a shot, or do you want me to just go with what comes to mind?
You can go with what comes to mind, and if I have anything to add, I will.
Or correct.
Or correct, yeah.
Who are we together? We are two individuals working as a team, building as deep of a layer of integration with one another while sifting through just the massive amounts of bullshit that we have to live through in this lifetime and timeline.
That's a beautiful answer.
Meagan, anything that comes to mind for you?
No. Nothing else to add, no.
You apparently got the answer correct, Patrick, so that's good. Nothing to correct. That's good. So, Ash, I know you had a couple like origin story questions. So I want you to kind of kick it off because I think that you're going to open up some things that will be interesting. So jump in.
All right. So I love the story of how you guys met. And I was curious if you would share that with our lovely listeners.
Sure. So talking about our, my closeted parfait, if you will. Patrick and I met at a EDM concert, an artist by the name of Bass Nectar, who has a cult-like following similar to like the Grateful Dead or Fish, how a lot of people go and travel for their shows, right? Like Bass Nectar had a cult-like following like that. And Patrick and I, before we met, both liked to travel and go to shows. And so that's how we met, is at one of those shows. But it's kind of interesting how because, he was living in New Mexico. I'm originally from Nashville, Tennessee. So how our circles kind of started to overlap was that was it 2 years prior?
Yeah. So Meagan and I met Labor Day weekend of 2017. So that was 7 years ago this past weekend in Hampton, Virginia, at, like she said, a Bass Nectar concert. But prior to that, I was spending the better part of 2016 traveling around the country, catching this artist's shows. And I went to a show in Denver, went to a fan meetup, met a couple of guys there that were super cool. We never exchanged info, but later that year, I went to Alabama for a New Year's Eve show and was walking around the venue trying to find a place to eat. And these same two guys that I had met that prior summer were looking for a place to eat as well. So it was like, okay, cool, let's stay connected. So we became really good friends. And then fast forward to Labor Day weekend of 2017, I went to go to this show to meet up with now mine and Meagan's mutual friend, Mike, who I was meeting at that show, met up with Mike, and then Meagan and I met, and the rest is pretty much history.
Mm-hmm.
So you guys did the long distance thing for how long?
For about a year.
9 months. Yeah, almost a full year.
I was just curious, when you guys first met, and obviously you're talking on the phone and all that, did you think that there was going to be this future where you would be combining life and business and have kind of such a similar trajectory?
In the early stages, I don't know that it was as prevalent. Meagan was going to school for nutrition and dietetics in Tennessee. I was, running what is now our online coaching business, during that time. I don't think it really started looking like we were going to collaborate in that deep of a sense until she moved out to New Mexico in December of 2018. And then when she was going through school at UNM, the University of New Mexico, that's when some gears started turning, especially when it came to Meagan going through her internship and getting a sense of what options are available to registered dietitians. And, obviously I had a little bit different lived experience in leaving the mainstream fitness industry and starting an online business. Meagan, is there anything you want to add?
No, I think that's pretty accurate. I would say it honestly wasn't until I was probably towards the end of my degree program. And then it was really solidified when I was in my internship after put my my graduate program, where like Patrick mentioned, the options presented to me as in the traditional sense as a dietitian, I was not having it. So I was like, you're going to have to figure something else out.
So how quickly in your journey did you guys realize shared interest in, I'm going to call it the space that you're in, right? Fitness and nutrition. And when were you able to realize the alignment that you had in the way that you viewed the traditional space that you're in versus where you both want to take it? Independent of business, independent of when that happened, but where in your relationship did you guys start to connect the dots?
I would say that's a little bit earlier on. I was obviously, when we met, I was already in the nutrition program and had background in bodybuilding and stuff like that. And Patrick had the same kind of background and had gone through his degree program with exercise science. So automatically we already kind of had that shared value. I don't know that we got, more opinionated about the industry until a little bit later on, because I just feel like the further and further I went in my degree program, the more and more my eyes were opened. And then Patrick, in his sense, the more exposure he got to the business side of things in the entrepreneurial world and other business owners and other ways that people go about selling fitness or talking about fitness, right? And that just not aligning with us deep down. I feel like the farther we both kind of got on those tracks, we both kind of realized we want to do something different.
Well, and you're in an industry that arguably is just absolutely swarming with shame around it, right? A lot of gaslighting, a lot of things that don't really help people transform and get the help that they need. It's overly simplified in some ways and then way overly complicated in other ways, right? And depending on who you listen to and what you could get completely conflicting information, none of which necessarily is specific to the individual and often is generalized. And so both of you have a backdrop in understanding this on the personal side. And I think that's where I want to explore for just a second, because you have two tangential, mutually reflective type paths in both the education paths that you took, as well as the bodybuilding experience, with both how you put yourself on stage and prepared and understood what that even looked like. So that in and of itself is one of the most subjective sports there is. It has nothing to do with physical ability, has nothing to do with strength. It has everything to do with appearance and somebody's ability to get their appearance into a certain mold and fashion, right? And I have some relationships with some of the highest relationships in that entire world of bodybuilding, and they will say the same thing. So we know that this is something that's real. Talk about your lived experiences as individuals and what maybe got you originally, each of you independently, into those areas of bodybuilding. And when did you start to see the disconnect for yourselves in that path?
For me, it was definitely a blend of a background in being an athlete. For one, I played baseball up until the collegiate level, and I always knew when I stopped playing baseball, I wanted to try another sport. And I knew before I stopped playing baseball that bodybuilding was going to be the next thing. So that was the initial driver. However, what continued to fuel that was a little bit of a unhealthy, dirty fuel source. I started bodybuilding I stopped playing collegiate baseball freshman year of college, and I made that transition pretty quickly into bodybuilding. And I had gone through a pretty traumatic breakup at that time, and it spawned a substantial amount of insecurity in my own body image and in my, how I viewed myself. And that definitely fueled pushing myself even harder to look a particular way to make up for, as Meagan and I talk about, I used an exercise solution to solve an emotional problem. And I think we can all acknowledge that exercise is helpful to manage your emotions in some way, shape, or form, but you can have too much of a good thing. And at that era of my life, from the age of at the age of 18 to the age of around 21, 22, even 23, I was pushing very, very hard on the physical front. To answer the second question you asked, my aha moment of this is probably not healthy for me, pushing it as hard as I am, was I ended up in the hospital at the time, I was experiencing a low-grade fever, but the urgent care in our area was not open. So I had to go to ER. And the ER, and I think this was all a blessing in disguise, they ran blood tests, they ran urine tests, and they said, hey, if you keep training and dieting the way that you are, you're going to go into kidney failure. So I was experiencing acute signs of acute renal insufficiency. So that, as I'm sitting there hooked up to IVs and recovering from what I thought was just a fever, that was my aha moment as far as like, oh, okay, I'm done with this sport, as I'm currently taking part in it. And that, nudged me a few degrees into trying to build a healthier relationship with my movement and my nutrition and even my mental and emotional health. Meagan, what about you?
Yeah, my entry into bodybuilding, I think, when I'm reflecting on it, why I was attracted to it initially is because I think as a woman, we are marketed to in such a way that our bodies are always at the forefront of that, and always, need to be thinner, need to be skinnier, need to look a certain way, right? Like always needing to fit into this box. And it was just kind of it fell into my lap, honestly. I had a friend who was into bodybuilding and he had won several shows that he was doing. And so I just randomly reached out to him and was like, how do I get involved in this? And he, graciously took me on and was training me and trying to help me with everything that he knew how. But definitely my fuel source going into that was vanity for sure. Because that's all I knew. I just thought if I looked a certain way, then I would be healthy. That is literally all I knew. I didn't know anything different. I didn't have any other context for it. Thankfully, I didn't, have any physical injuries like Patrick or end up in the hospital with anything physically. But I would say the collateral for me was more of my mental health.
Yeah.
That came along with that, just really poor body image. And it took several years to work through that. And, in therapy and other things. And I'm not going to lie, it still lingers even today. It's as a woman really hard to get out of that box. And it's just always a fight. So, that's kind of my background with it. But it's more of a mental hurdle for me to get out of since bodybuilding.
Yeah.
What would you guys say if you had to characterize the top 3 to 5 things that you view as major issues within the health and fitness space currently right now?
Just 3 to 5?
I mean, as many as we have time for. I love all of them.
The first issue that I think about, and this is from my experience as a personal trainer working with people in person for 8, 9, 10 years, is, the mainstream fitness business model was not made and was not built to help people get to their goals. It was built to make people a recurring customer. So, there are some substantial roots in predatory capitalism and taking advantage of people's ignorance, and making people think that if you work out an hour or 2 a week with a coach, that all your wildest health dreams, mental, emotional, physical, spiritual, everything's just going to magically come true. That's the first one that comes up for me. We can play, some ping pong between Meagan and I if you want to throw the second one that you can think of.
I would say this is I guess less about like the fitness space specifically, but for me, coming from the dietetics space and something that I see in my profession as a whole is like it's very reactive and not as much proactive work being done. And it's harder to get access to that proactive like healthcare. So anytime, if you want to get access to a dietitian through insurance, say, like it's all reactive type stuff. And there's a lot that I feel like you're already kind of working at a deficit, coming at it from that place. And so that would be a big one for me. And then I think fitness wise, it's a lot of the vanity still. Like that is what drives a lot of people's motivation to change. And it's really hard to sell like, hey, this isn't going to be a sustainable fuel source 5-10 years down the road. Like eventually you're going to have to care about something else to keep you going.
I love that.
One of the things that I respect about both of you is your integration of both lived personal experience and like really deep research and knowledge that allows you to really come prepared to almost any conversation and be able to really help individuals identify where are some of those blocks, and not just in the mechanics of what and how you support people for movement and nutrition and dietary needs. But again, it's a lot of the internal work. You both have also been on your own journeys as individuals and collectively. And a lot of your own lived experiences as individuals are what drove you into the spaces that you're in and are so passionate about helping so many others. So maybe give us a little bit of insight to the path for you two deciding to come together, how you were able to make that work amongst each other, and where do you stand today as it relates to your core focus and mission through Aware Fitness and Nutrition?
When it comes to she and I really leaning in and collaborating with one another on a deeper level, a lot of that happened rather organically. To give, good example, like my roots are in personal training and movement. I don't have a movement problem. It's not hard for me to stay consistent with exercise and movement. And that just through our relationship has been a way that we've been able to really support one another. Like she can lean on me to encourage her and I to stay active, where on the flip side, she's been super, super supportive in helping upgrade my level of intelligence around food to make sure that we're doing what we need to, in many cases, break some of the generational health curses that she and I have been born into in our families, and just seeing that as an opportunity as far as like, what can we do as a team relative to what we can control in our relationship and in our home life and in our lifestyle that can help really shift the direction of where our health is going and help fill in some gaps where maybe our families weren't able to, help us put that together. And I think through supporting one another, at least from my perspective, supporting one another in that way, it helped blossom continued ideas. A lot of it was being reflected back to us from just talking with people around, hey, we're, Megan's at school to be a registered dietitian. They're like, okay, what's next when she's done with school? Are you going to go into business together? And then we were like, that might be a good idea in conjunction with Megan's experience in her internship and just getting a sense of what she did or did not want to do.
Yeah. Go ahead.
I was just going to ask, so what do you have a typical client? What do people come to you guys with as far as like goals or reasons? What brings them to you?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think the main one is they've tried everything else. And it goes back to that piece of, finding that long-term fuel source, because a lot of times when it is vanity, you'll keep trying everything over and over and over again. And then you find yourself back at square one over and over and over again. And so eventually there's this realization of like, oh, I need to do things differently, but nobody has ever shown me how. And so that's how we end up getting in touch with the clients that work really well with us. Because Brian, like you mentioned, like it is a deeper approach. We help with other things other than just like what you eat and how you move. We really help facilitate a new standard for a lot of people.
I have to say I'm that person. I have just recently come to terms with the admission that I'm damaged in terms of my relationship with food and my own body. And so me coming to you guys is a result of me finally being at a place where I want to put energy towards repairing the root of all of those problems that stem from it. And, you know, particularly as a mom of a daughter, seeing how a lot of those inherited patterns, how my genetics are being passed on, and I'm recognizing behaviors in my daughter that I know I see in myself. But something that Meagan and I recently chatted about, I really would love to bring up because it's kind of like coincides with what you were just talking about, like that deeper motivation and what causes people to want to look at, you know, health and exercise. And, you know, I'm at this place where I know in my brain that my body size or, you know, the condition of my stomach in terms of how flat it is, or, you know, if my thighs touch when I walk, you know, things like that, that are places that people really center in and judge themselves. Like that's not anything to do with my true worth, right? But feeling that in my heart and actually putting that into practice is completely different. And when asked about like, what is my motivation for wanting to be healthier? I can still say like right now, beyond the education, when it comes to how I view myself physically, my dream is to get to a place where I look in the mirror and I'm happy no matter what gene size I'm in. But that's not true for me personally right now. I can look at other women and see beauty in every body type, every size, truly, like from the bottom of my heart. But I can look in the mirror and see myself and think, oh, if I'm not bony or if I, you know, whatever it is that I want to focus on at that time, it's really hard to change that. And so I hope that through this process, the end will be me wanting to be healthy because of all those internal emotional reasons, like wanting to be a better parent, having better mobility, like, you know, all those positive things, and not just because I want to look pretty and feel attractive. But I own that that's where I still am. And I think that no matter where you are, I'm sure people find themselves back at that place. But I assume, and I'm guessing that this is a common thread that you guys see with women and men in general. Did you see kind of like that same toxic self-judgment with the males who are also doing bodybuilding? And in your clientele, is it skewed more female than male, or what does that look like in terms of the experience?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think the best answer that comes to mind is whether you are a male or a female, we are all victims of the same system. I think that's something we all collectively, at least in America, need to be willing to come to terms with, because we see it just as much with our male clients as we do with the female clients, you know, at the end of the day. So it's very true. And I appreciate you, Meagan and I both appreciate you sharing all of that, Ashley, because that's part of the nuanced conversation that has to be had when it comes to a coach actually supporting a client and acknowledging, yes, your headspace may very well be in a space that is no longer serving you, but it's still there. And knowing how to tease out a level of nuance through sustainable behavior change that's not perpetuating that narrative that you're wanting to let go of. Right. And that's what we see a lot within the nutrition and fitness coaching spaces, is like, they know that that's your fuel source right now, or it may be an old fuel source that you're wanting to let go of, and they will exploit it for the sake of just like getting you the progress that you say that you're wanting to get, even though they, as the coach, know long term it's not, you know, we could follow up with you or someone in that space a year or 2 years from now, and they're back to square one, or they're in an even worse position.
Well, I think part of it is the reward that you get, right? So it's like you lose weight and everyone applauds and acts like it was this major victory, which for some it truly is, right? Like that is necessary. And I'm not trying to take away how difficult that journey can be for people. But from an unhealthy, like mental perspective, it's often, it's not like people don't come up and generally say, oh, your energy just seems more positive, or like you seem at peace. It's like, oh, like, you look a little different, or, oh, you've lost all this weight. Like I've had comments on either side,
Mm-hmm.
So just because we're on this thread, and I don't know that I was totally anticipating it, but I like it.
Well, that's the story of our life.
I know. There's often things I don't expect that I end up liking. It's great. I have to just acknowledge, and this is because of Patrick and Meagan, the relationship that we've developed with them and the trust that you have with them, that you're able to go to the places that you are right now. You're ready for it. They're the right coaches to help you with it.
Absolutely.
You knew that. It all aligns. What would you say is a unique element of the experience you've had as a client so far that's led to a connection or a lesson that you've been able to verbalize to yourself and to our daughter?
Different things. Two different things come to mind. I would tell you that coming from a psychological place, I know that my issues are often rooted in control. And I believe that a lot of that is due to my own neurodiversities. But it has been an area in my life. And when I say it, I mean my body, my weight, what I eat is something that I can control.
Mm-hmm.
And I get a sense of, we're probably going to need to put a trigger warning on this episode. I get a sense of like achievement or fulfillment when I restrict myself. And so that's not like all time. That's not consistent across the board. But in moments when I'm struggling, it's like, ooh, I'm extra hungry because I skipped a meal. And it feels like you want to pat yourself on the back instead of thinking of it as like, oh, I'm lightheaded because I didn't feel my body and I feel a headache coming on and it's going to impact the rest of my day. There's not thought. There's like this instant little dopamine hit, like, ooh, this might help me lose weight, which is not true, right? What we talked about recently is, people come to Meagan and Patrick and they're like, oh my God, I'm eating so many carbs. I was like, I'm eating more food than I typically eat. And the scale has not budged. And one of the things that's hardest for me is letting go of the scale, because anytime I've been in any other fitness and nutrition program, for those of you just listening, I'm using air quotes around those words, but the scale was like, no, we want you to weigh yourself every day. We want measurements on a weekly basis. I mean, I've done the body composition where, you're looking at literally your fat and muscle percentage and it's obsessive, but it gives you such gratification. Yeah. So I would say that's the biggest thing, like the letting go of control and trusting that my body as it is right now is actually capable of regulating itself, both from a hormonal, nutrition, all of those different pieces. That is scary for me because I don't trust myself.
Yeah.
And then the thing that what I'm working on this week is eating to being 80% full.
Yeah.
And that is something I talked to our daughter about the other night, and no one's ever told me, that means that you should be able to go on a walk after you eat your meal comfortably and not feel the heavy weight in your stomach. That's a good way of gauging. And that was a total aha moment for our daughter. And she's someone who has trouble recognizing when she's full. And so that's a good cue for us to be able to have that conversation and say like, oh, if we're going to go on an after-walk dinner or a walk after dinner, do you think you'll be able to do that? Or are you going to have an upset tummy? And that has helped foster conversation with us.
Thank you for going there. But again, just being with you for 18 years and watching the patterns and also the transformation that's happening real time, you're a perfect case study, honestly, for the work that they do. And I think the way you articulate that, I would say that the coaches are probably proud with the language that she used. And so I think that's really cool. I want to mix up just a little bit for the sake of time for what we have left for today. And I also know that we're going to have you guys back again in the future because there's lots of layers to where we can take this conversation. And I want to make sure we have the time and space to explore, because you both have so much value to add. I had the privilege not long ago of sharing a housing space with you guys for the better part of a week, right? You had invited me because you're regulars down to VCon every single year, and you invited me and some others to come join. And the reason I bring that up is because I've worked with both of you now for a long time in different capacities, right? But there's an element of sharing a space with people that gives you a more profound perspective of who they are and some of the tendencies or challenges or skill sets and strengths and how they just get amplified when you're in that space. And so where I want to start with this is just the acknowledgement of the beauty and contrast between the two of you that I would say in many ways is representative of the stark contrast that exists with us in very different ways. But as I look at it, it's just, I see so much love between the two of you and so much commitment to the way that you guys approach and support each other. And so I'd like to give just a little bit of anecdotal experience to what I witnessed. And then I'd like to ask you some questions around it. But like, just to give some examples, like Patrick, we were joking in the beginning of this call about how you're eccentric, right? Sure. And here's the reality. You're also brilliant, right? And the way that you communicate and the length at which you communicate, and as well as what we've talked about as well that I share with you is different neurodiversities. And what does that mean as a type A, strong, hard charging male, right? And how that shows up in our worlds. And I say all of that because there is so many misconceptions that people can have around how neurodiverse males can show up and where that ego and armor ultimately will disconnect us from who they are and their real intent. Something I've struggled with. It's something that I know that we've talked about. Right. But what I also really love is Meagan has a really unique food allergy. And I say really unique because there's different layers to understanding of what this is. And though she is the one with the dietitian and nutrition background, you viewed it as a personal mission to care for her in the way that you could help create recipes and menus and things that would allow her to eat and have the fuel that she needs. Right. Meagan, respectively as well, you said it in your intro based on how you described yourself to be, you are a grounding presence. And just like it's a gift that you have Patrick and the way that he views and cares for you, he is also equally gifted to have you in his life to ground the energy and to shed so much light and perspective in such a loving way that's supportive of where his skill sets are really strong and where they struggle. And I've witnessed you both do this. The reason I highlight this, though, is because working together in a business, having a marriage and a relationship, caring for each other, focusing on priorities, dealing with different neurodiversities, dealing with generational patterns and trauma, dealing with current real-time adjustments that need to be made. By the way, it's really fucking hard sometimes to do. We know this because we live it. And so, again, whether you speak as individuals or one of you speaks on this, it's completely up to you. But I'd like to understand in the years that you've been together and how you've been able to come together, how were you able to identify the areas that you complement each other, where you conflict, and how you're able to utilize each other's strengths to backfill and walk alongside your partner versus feeling like it's always a rubber resistance?
Full transparency, I feel like we're still working on that. I feel like
by the way, so are we.
Yeah,
so are we. Yeah. It's okay. That's okay. I love the ends. Yeah.
Yeah. It's a constant growth into that. Like, and I think, anybody who's listening to this would probably, and is in a similar situation, can relate to that for sure. But I would say the biggest, way that we've been able to accomplish that thus far is just really good communication and being clear on, communicating, like, what do you think your perceived strengths are? What do you need from me? Like, what does support actually look like? And laying that out in a lot of detail. So that way we both are very clear around like what each other needs in business and in our personal relationships, and how those two can kind of, blend sometimes. And so just constantly refining that process too, because what would work maybe 2 years ago isn't going to work now because we're evolving and changing as we go. So I would say like the biggest thing is communication, and just getting really clear on what each other needs at any given point in time.
I think that's really beautiful. And Patrick, if you have something to add, by all means, please do so. Otherwise, I'm going to jump in and ask another question.
Sure. I'll just briefly piggyback. Like I agree. It's rooted in communication. For context, in the 9 months that Meagan and I were long distance, it forced our hand in communication, and really, really leaning into over communicating as opposed to under communicating. And I think in the area I would want to piggyback on relative to the communication piece is being able to hold space and show compassion for one another in the areas in which we are deficient. Yeah. There are areas of communication that I am currently deficient in, and it would be much harder for me to develop that skill set and communicating with Meagan on an emotional level if she was just pouring salt on the wound the entire time of my already awareness of this lack of a skill set.
Yeah. Well, one thing I want to give credit to you deeply for, Patrick, is the level of ownership that I also witness you consistently stepping into when you're made aware of something. And so with permission, I'd like to share a very specific interaction that took place, because this was a dynamic that took place as well. But I think it's important to acknowledge that took place, and it was regarding shoes. Are you cool with me? Okay. Yeah. All right. Yeah. Okay. So you laugh because again, we can all find the levity in it because we have love and appreciation and respect for each other. But for context for everybody in this shared space, I walked in one day after like a really full couple of days. And Patrick is somebody that really likes to have his environment be a very particular way. And I knew that. And I want to always respect that, right? Like I find myself easy to blend in, but it was one of those things where, again, I think Meagan read the room when I walked in, and I went into the bathroom. And as soon as I came out, you were like, "Hey dude, do you have a problem? Not wearing your shoes," or whatever the words were, right? Sure, it was like, but it was about like, "Hey, would you take your shoes off in the house?" And it was a really just unexpected thing for me. It wasn't the concept as much as it was the timing, right? And I found myself depleted at the end of the day. Okay, I'm not upset by this, but why I call attention to this is because I'm a very literal communicator. And though I have an ability to see emotional intelligence and read rooms and environments, I can also be very singular-minded focus. Which means that I do the exact same thing that you just did without any context or nuance as to what happened. And I have done that. And yet she's reminded me many times, hey, dumbass, open your eyes. Because you missed the entire big picture and you focused on something that really, though, we're going to figure out isn't important in the moment. Mm-hmm. And why I call attention to that is, again, the grace with which that was handled. I know for a fact and I don't remember if you guys told me this or not, but I genuinely believe Meagan brought that to your attention. She highlighted and just gave you an awareness moment. And what did you do, which was so well received by me? You came in and you fully took ownership and apologized just for how jarring it was.
Right.
And that level of trust in a partnership is so required. But what that also requires, to double down on the communication that you talked about, is emotional safety amongst each other. And I believe that the only way we in our business can be effective, and you in your business can be effective, is if we learn how to hold space and create emotional safety for our clients. Because if that doesn't exist, nothing else does. Mm-hmm. So to witness you guys prioritize that in your marriage was beautiful. How do you guys both respectively create emotionally safe environments to allow some of the ahas and breakthroughs that we're hearing Ashley so clearly articulate?
You're saying with clients or together?
With clients.
With clients.
Yep.
The first thing that comes to mind for me is just leading with transparency as far as our own lived experience. I can think of a particular time in my life, which was actually right at the beginning of mine and Meagan's relationship, where I had gone about 7 or 8 years coaching clients thinking that I needed to be the perfect coach all the time. And I was going through a season of my life where I was realizing, it's okay to not be okay. and really, really leaning into conversations with my clients around, this is stuff that's going on with my mental health. And it really created a deeper bond, because they're like, oh, cool, you're a fucking human being too. You're not just this robot that's guiding me through exercises and expecting me to be perfect. So from my experience, for Meagan and I both, I think it's just being transparent with people. Like we're also human beings on planet Earth in the Milky Way galaxy, trying to make sense of all of this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think for me, I'm thinking of one client in particular, it makes me laugh, but she, told me, she's like, you're just real. Because I would tell her, like, she was telling me about her ambivalence to working out and going to the gym. And I was like, hey, I can relate. I actually have to have Patrick hold me accountable for that. Because otherwise I'm not going to the gym and I'm not going to be working out if I struggle with that accountability. And so, like Patrick said, just like leaning into the transparency piece, and like people like to know that their coaches are real people that struggle with the same things that they struggle with. It just may look a little different, but to me, it's no use in trying to look perfect, because I don't think that's relatable at all.
Yeah. So I don't actually know what you and Ashley talk about, because she gives me downloads and reports, but like, obviously I'm not in the mixture of it, and I want to honor that space for you guys and her with you as her coaches. So I don't actually know this for sure. So this may be a totally naive comment, but my curiosity is, given that men and women both deal with the same things, and typically around nutrition and movement, we are in some form or fashion talking about bodies, right? We're getting into talking about somebody's physical body, their physical experience. And yes, you're getting deeper. So that part I think we're clear on, but talking respectively across a man to a woman around a body can be a challenge, and vice versa. And so I'm really curious, because I know you both have worked with men and women, and you both obviously separate in the areas that you have expertise to serve your clients. How have you guys learned to bridge the gaps on the difficult discussions across gender roles, and to do that in a way that can still feel safe, despite the fact that talking maybe man to a woman or vice versa could be really uncomfortable for certain people?
Mm-hmm. I think for me, when I'm working with our male clients, I know my experience is going to be different as a woman, and I just know that. So I try to be intentional about approaching conversations differently, and really just being, from my side, being more curious about their own experience and asking questions and getting to know them, and letting them know that they're allowed to have the safe space to talk about maybe some things that they've never talked about before. And so where I can maybe relate to Ashley a little bit better, because we're both women and probably have very similar experiences with the fitness industry. Yeah, I think with men, I just have to be more curious and open, because my experience is going to be different.
Yeah, Patrick, I would love it if you could answer that question as well, because I also know you've trained women, and there's, when you're working with and showing form and movements, like there's layers of appropriateness that also take place, not only in conversations, but in movement, and how you guide people and direct them with their bodies. And I think that this is an area where certain gyms or certain experiences that people can have can make them not trust trainers in that capacity. And so how have you navigated it, both from a conversational, but from a physical movement side as well?
Sure. The first thing that comes to mind is what kind of internal dialogue I'm having with myself prior to those experiences. And first and foremost, when it comes to helping support women through the multiple dimensions of their well-being, I have a zero tolerance policy for bullshit. That's just what I had whenever I was training in the gym, because I know that can be a very slippery slope and there's a lot of ambiguity there. And with that being my internal dialogue, really leading with a lot of openness and authenticity and communication, and just like Meagan is saying, leading with a level of curiosity, but also letting them know that they are always in the driver's seat. I'm just a guide. They're steering the wheel of the ship. I'm on the top with a binocular looking at the horizon. And it's through our continued communication of what they're comfortable with talking about, what movement they're comfortable with doing or not doing, is really, really important. And also by letting them know when they're in the driver's seat that they have every right to educate me on something that I am ignorant about. And it's my job to be open to learning from their lived experience instead of getting on my soapbox and mansplaining to them.
Love it.
I can have a tendency to mansplain if I'm not careful. I have to be really, really careful. I respect that boundary, but I hear you completely.
Sure.
Because it's never actually an attempt or intent to do so, but it's a pattern that I can fall into too easily. You were about to say something, so I'm going to pause because I also know we're tighter on time here. So
yeah. Hey, so let's talk TikTok for a second. I would love it if you could each give an example of something that you've seen on TikTok that's either a current fad or challenge that you think actually has a detrimental effect on people doing it or watching the videos. Could be anything, movement, diet, nutrition, working out, complete freedom.
Yeah. The first thing that comes to mind, and this is on any social media platform, I see these all over the place, is what I eat in a day videos, especially when at the beginning of the video, it is a girl or guy showing off their body. If they have abs or whatever, implying like, hey, if you eat this way, you can look like me. And a lot of people that don't know, hey, if I just eat healthy, then maybe I can look like them, right? That is really harmful because they're going to look their certain way. I'm going to look the way I look. You guys are going to look the way you look. Regardless of if we eat the exact same, we're never going to look identical. And that can be a really hard thing for people to process. And I know it's probably like an innocent, well-intentioned thing on the creator side of things. But I have seen it in conversations I've had with clients over and over again around just like, not helping body image issues either. Even though they feel like they're trying everything, it just kind of adds to that feeling of hopelessness because they're trying everything that they can.
Failure.
And seeing the same results as that person on TikTok, right? So that's the main one that I see that is still like, regardless of other like dietitians and creators educating on it, it is still running rampant online for sure.
For me, on the movement side of things, what really gets under my skin and I think is very detrimental to all human beings, regardless of what stage of life that they're in, is having people state that there's only one legitimate form of exercise. I've heard plenty of things where I've heard people talk about how walking is not a legitimate form of exercise, jogging, like Jesus fucking Christ. Like we live under the framework of something is better than nothing. All movement counts. And it just gets really, really tiring when there's this acknowledgement that we live in unfortunately in America, we live in an obesity. The phrase is we live in an obesogenic genetic, or gosh, I'm butchering it, but it's babe. What is it? I'm having a hard day.
Take a breath. We got this. We got this.
The phrase is, I believe the phrase is obesogenic society, where it's easier to take on qualities that lead to obesity and being overweight than not. And the last thing people need to hear is that what little easy forms of exercise and movement are not valid is not helping get people up and moving when they're being told that, one is better than the other. So that's
because it's like, why even bother sometimes, right?
Right. It pushes people into a state of paralysis, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, like I said, we are definitely going to have you guys back for a second episode because you guys are doing some really phenomenal work, not just in kind of the B2C market, helping individuals and high performers like Ashley and myself get to better levels and be able to fuel their sources and stay consistent. But I know you're also doing a lot in the organizational side of things, especially with a lot of nonprofits and the mental health organizational side, and really helping reshape narratives and possibility around what nutrition can actually look like in a space that typically is expected to only be decline. I really want to explore these things further because the impact that you guys are having, the way that you view humanity and the types of causes that you advocate for and the people that you're advocating for are often people that are in the fringes of society, and you're bringing a voice to things that need to be normalized in conversation. And so I'm extremely grateful for all of that. We will have you back for a second episode. As we get ready to wrap here, though, I would love it. Like, what is just the narrative and the message? If you had just a couple of sentences to make a statement to the world, what do you want them to hear? No pressure.
Meagan, do you need some time? You want
This
me to
will be broadcast to every single person in the world.
Yeah, we're aware of fitness coaching, and we're here to say fuck you to the mainstream fitness industry. I think that's pretty simple.
All right. I love that. I love that. Well, for everybody that just watched Patrick and Meagan flip their lid, they jumped in. They absolutely shared elements of their stories, their struggles, not just as individuals, but as couples and as professionals. There's a journey that we all have to learn and navigate through our respective fields, and we don't always see everything, and there's constantly new things that we learn. It's a matter of communication with yourself and with each other, and creating those environments where there's emotional safety, again, for yourself and for others, to allow opportunity for growth to exist. And so, Patrick and Meagan, I'm going to say thank you very much for being with us today. Very grateful for who you are and who you are to us. And we look forward to doing a lot more with you guys. We love you to pieces.
Thank you. We love y'all too.
Me too.
And for the rest of you, you can get to the same place they are. You just got to flip open your lid and scan your can.
What you can probably tell by now is that I love telling these stories, but what I love even more is the impact that's coming from them. You see, we're on a mission to impact over 1 billion lives as quickly as possible. But to do that, we need you. See, we believe that moved people move people. And so all I'm asking is if you've resonated, connected with any of the messaging, please consider commenting, sharing, leave a rating and review. Thank you so much for tuning into Flipping the Lid. And if you want more information on the show, how to become a guest, how to recommend a guest, or any of the other details, head over to flippingthelid.com. We'll see you there.